It's a peaceful Sunday morning in Wellesley, Massachusetts. People are walking their dogs at Morse's Pond, a local nature reserve. At 8:56 a.m., an apparently hysterical man rings police. He tells them his wife has been attacked and is lying dead in the woods. The caller is a respected local doctor. His wife has been brutally bludgeoned and stabbed to death. What sort of person would attack an innocent woman so violently? Catching a killer requires conclusive forensic evidence. From clues at the scene of the crime to minute examination in the forensics lab, from the cold reality of the pathologist's table to DNA sampling, digital analysis, each piece of killer evidence brings the murderer closer to justice. "30 miles west of downtown Boston in Massachusetts lies Wellesley, an affluent town with a colonial New England charm. On Sunday, the 31st of October, 1999, Wellesley is rocked by its first murder in 40 years. At 8:56 that morning, police get a frantic call from a man saying that someone has attacked his wife. Police and forensics are already on the scene when Detective Martin Foley arrives to head up the investigation.
When I arrived at the scene, I was first impressed with what I saw. They had crime scene tape, and there was a Wellesley police officer, and he wasn't allowing people in at all until they got their name and identification. So for me, that was just a great start. That's how you want to have a crime scene set up.
Detective Foley's first job was to view the body.
Clearly, from 30, 40 feet away, I could see the wounds. I could see the way she was dressed, and the way she was lying in the dirt. Her head was directly back, but tilted to one side, and there was a massive neck wound, 7 or 8 inches long. Clearly a fatal wound.
The victim is May Greinader, who was 58. She and her 60-year-old husband, Dirk, had been walking their Alsatian dog in the park. It was Dirk, a well-respected local doctor, who had called the police for help.
He was very well known in his field. He was an instructor at Harvard Medical School. He had a very successful practice. A well-known physician, a well-known family man.
Dirk and May had been married for over 30 years and seemed to have a close and happy relationship. They had 3 grown-up children, a son studying medicine like his father, and their eldest daughter was about to get married.
When I or any detective arrive at a scene like this, you can't have preconceived notions of what happened or who might have done it. And I know what the statistics say, that 90% of those cases are committed by somebody that they know. I look at that saying there's 10% of those cases that aren't.
While the forensics team starts working over the crime scene, Detective Foley questions Dr. Greinader about the couple's movements that morning.
I had just asked him point blank, what happened? And he said they were walking through the pine tree forest and May had slipped on a pebble or slipped on a rock and she had a bad back. They made a decision that he would continue on the walk down towards the pond and he would meet May right around where I first arrived at.
Dr. Greinader claimed that the dog started acting strangely and was kind of looking back towards where they had left May. So they went back, and Dirk claims that he saw May lying down and thought, well, maybe she was doing that to relieve her back pain because it wasn't uncommon for her to lie down when she hurt her back. But that when he got close to her, he noticed a little like blood, a little red something, and then when he came totally upon her, that's when he said that he found her grievously attacked.
But Detective Foley is surprised by Dr. Greiner's behavior.
He wasn't paying attention to where his wife was. Had he looked to his left, 150, 200 feet, that's where she lied. I didn't see him glance over in that direction at all.
Greiner is adamant that a madman must have attacked his wife. The victim's tracksuit bottoms had been cut with a knife. At this stage of the investigation, police keep an open mind and have to consider whether the attack was sexually motivated.
One of the questions I asked Dirk during our conversation was, had he had sex with his wife that day or the day before or any time recently? And he said, no, he hadn't. The reason I asked that question was more thinking that if she was in fact raped, we could exclude him. But at this point, it's been 10, 15 minutes maybe. He had told me that he found her, he touched her, he tried to pick her up. And my observations at this point were that he had black pants on, a bright yellow nylon windbreaker on, and he had glasses, all of which had blood on it.
Dr. Greiner is covered in blood, but bizarrely, there is one place where there is none at all.
He said that he gave her CPR and tried to pick her up, said that she was like a dead weight. I said, well, there isn't any blood on your hands. And he had no explanation for that. I asked him, had he washed his hands? And he says, no.
The investigators clearly zeroed in early on the fact that Dr. Greiner's hands were very clean, where he had jacket sleeves that were clearly bloodstained. And that raised a concern that he may have been wearing gloves to commit the murder.
Greiner's clothes were covered in blood, and his excuse was that he was cradling his dying or dead wife after she'd been attacked by this desperate and brutal assailant. But of course, there was one problem with the story, one crucial inconsistency. His hands were bloodless. They should have been smeared in blood, and he told detectives that he wasn't wearing any gloves. For the detectives, this was one crucial inconsistency. This was one chink in the good doctor's story.
The longer he had those clothes on, I was getting nervous that we're going to lose something. So I said, well, I'd like to take you back to Wellesley Police Station. I had him undress, and looking at his clothing, he had white sneakers that had spatter on them, brownish red, that appeared to be blood. What was most evident to me was the yellow windbreaker, and it had blood spatter on it, but it also had small mini dots, and that's the only way I can describe it. Mini dots, and they're primarily on his sleeves, in particular his left sleeve.
The blood-spattered clothes are the detectives' second piece of crucial evidence, and they are sent off for DNA analysis. The detectives are already suspicious about Dr. Greiner's clean hands, but Detective Foley notices something else.
I just happened to notice that his fingernails were really, really long and kind of dirty. And I asked, "Can we have your nails?" He's a physician. The fingernails were dirty. I don't know why.
The scrapings from underneath the nails are the third piece of evidence. It's just a hunch from Detective Foley, but he sends the clippings off for analysis to see what's in the dirt. Dr. Greinader is currently the prime suspect. But the police can't detain him. They have no proof and, crucially, no motive. All the evidence detectives have so far is May's body. Dr. Greinader's blood-covered clothes and trainers, and his dirty nail clippings. He says he cradled her body when he found her after the attack, but strangely, his hands have no blood on them, and police are struggling to understand why. Detective Foley is anxious to see inside the family home before Greinader has a chance to destroy any potential evidence, but he doesn't have a warrant.
I asked his attorney, hey, would you mind if we follow you back to Dirk's house? And I'd like to just take a walk through. He says, why? Why do you want to do that? He says, well, I'd feel horrible if there's a pool of blood in the kitchen and I didn't know about it. So he said, sure, come on back. And we did. We followed Dirk Greinader and his lawyer back to his house. We walked through the house, but there was no sign of any struggle in the house or anything that I thought would be unusual. And I left to go back to the crime scene.
This was a brutal murder. Dr. Greinader was covered in blood. It seemed he didn't leave the park before he called the police. If he was the killer, then it was very likely that the weapons he used would be very close by. Police start searching all the pathways in the area. They learned that directly after discovering May's body, Greinader was seen acting oddly, dashing up a side path.
One of the people that we talked to was a dog walker, and he saw Dirk leave from where May's body was found, walked down that pathway, and 30 seconds later, he came up. At that point, Dirk asked Mr. Keir, the dog walker, if he had a cell phone, told him his wife had been attacked, kind of pointing over towards where she was found, and he left him going up.
If you had found your wife like that, wouldn't you have come out of there like screaming, like, help, help, my wife's been attacked, send help, call help, anything? There was none of that.
The logical thing to do would be to walk right by Mr. Keir, right towards his car where his cell phone was. Yet he didn't do that. Now, during this whole conversation that I had with Dirk earlier, he never said he saw anybody.
Following up the witness evidence that Greinader briefly ran down a side path but returned soon after, police investigate.
One of the canine officers there told me that a dog had alerted on a storm drain. So using our flashlights, I was able to look down at that storm drain. Clearly, I saw the handle of a hammer and what appeared to be a folding knife and a glove. One glove in the storm drain. In looking at the hammer, it had those same dot pattern that I could see on Dirk's coat. Clearly, the knife was bloodied, and again, those dot patterns were on that knife. And the glove had a plastic covering on it that had dots on it.
The police immediately send the tools and glove for DNA analysis. The hammer and knife test positive for May and Dirk's DNA, then the police have found the weapons.
Often people will try to get rid of evidence, their clothing, a murder weapon. In this particular case, the items were thrown into a storm drain. Potentially, in a big storm, that drain's going to get flooded, the items are then submerged, which clearly might have affected the success of getting forensic trace evidence.
But the investigators' hopes are dashed when the DNA results come back. There's only a partial match for May's blood, and the DNA test on the gloves is inconclusive.
Can we prove it's May's blood through DNA processes? We couldn't positively say it was May's DNA, so we didn't use it.
The discovery of the likely weapons has opened up the investigation, and Greinader's claim that a madman killed May.
One glove, the hammer and the knife, was very important for the investigators. He had given conflicting stories about whether he had even gone down there on this path. Then, when it became clear that Dirk found out that the witnesses were telling the police that he had gone down there, that's when he claimed that I saw a jogger. And then he claimed that I didn't really see a jogger, I saw a shadow. So I went down there to investigate. But this was an instance where his story changed to try to fit what the evidence was starting to show.
At that point, I'm realizing I was hearing a story, not the truth. I was hearing what Dirk Grindeder wanted me to hear. We had probable cause to believe that Dirk was certainly involved in his wife's killing, and he had more information, and there's more evidence to be found.
When we look at his actions after the murder was committed, it appears to be quite calm and calculated. He methodically tries to get rid of the evidence, but I'm sure there must have been a degree of internal panic he was just able to overcome. To me, that indicates this paradox of his ability to control his emotions. At the time of the murder, it was very frenzied and violent and chaotic, yet just moments afterwards, he's able to quench these emotions as a necessity to try and get through it and try and get away with this murder.
Forensics have been scouring the area for anything that could be relevant. They found several plastic Ziploc food bags. One of them has blood on it. Are they just litter, or do they have some connection to May's murder? Detective Foley sends these off to the lab to see if the blood is May's. Police are slowly amassing their evidence. They have found what they believe to be the weapons, but they need to understand exactly how May was killed. The next day, the pathologist's report comes through.
He told us that there were 2 marks on the back of May's head that would have been the result of a blunt force trauma. One of the blows was a glancing blow, and the second one was a more substantial, probably fracturing her skull. Maybe not killing her, but certainly knocking her down or disabling her quite a bit.
This was really important because I think the plan was Dirk wanted to render her unconscious and then do whatever he was gonna do. He didn't render her unconscious. He then had to use the knife to kill her while she was fighting him, and that caused him to be within a foot or two of her during what some of the experts called the bloodshed incident.
So when people sustain injuries, if somebody has assaulted them in any way, then we can look at the distribution of bloodstains to try and establish what happened to them in those final moments before they died.
The killer had severed a major artery in May's throat. Could the spatter on Grindeder's clothes have been caused by him attacking her?
If someone sustains a damaged artery, then the blood projects from that artery almost like a column of blood, which then breaks up into droplets that produce a pattern, a spurt pattern, that we can say that's from a damaged artery. So in this particular case, there would have been a very high expectation of what we call projected blood in that crime scene. And again, if we add on then any further interaction, such as the delivery of multiple stab injuries, moving the body, any kind of scenario where I am putting myself in the line of that blood, then that's going to transfer onto my clothing.
Everybody came to a conclusion that the spatter that was on his shoes and his jacket, first of all, it was May Grindeder's blood. DNA proved that. Second of all, he would have had to have been present within 2 feet of May Grindeder to get blood spatter like that.
Forensic investigators are still working at the crime scene, and one thing puzzles them.
Nothing had fingerprints on it. Nothing.
Often the absence of forensic evidence may lead to a powerful circumstantial case against a potential suspect. In this instance, Graniter's car, the handles had no fingerprints on it. Very odd indeed. But that was telling in itself. It indicated perhaps Graniter was forensically aware. And in that absence, it provided a very powerful circumstantial case that he may very well have been the killer.
The fact that there were no fingerprints in this case concluded that the perpetrator was wearing gloves.
Searching the area near to where Dr. Graniter parked his car, investigators find another storm drain.
So they looked down in it, and they could see what they thought was a glove, similar to one we recovered the day before. One of the troopers picked up the glove. We had a brown paper bag. He put the glove on the brown paper bag, and almost eerily, blood was flowing from the glove. The gloves had a pattern on them. So if the gloves themselves were soaked in blood, and you touched anything with those blood-soaked gloves, it's going to leave an impression of those gloves. Those impressions were everywhere.
The raised dot impressions from the gloves were found on the weapons and also on Dr. Graniter's blood-stained jacket. Foley concluded that the gloves must have been used in the killing. 12 days after May's murder, police returned to the Graniter home with a search warrant. Certain now that Graniter is the killer, the police scour the house. They find boxes of Ziploc bags in the kitchen that bear a resemblance to those found at the crime scene.
I didn't know you could even do this. The FBI lab in Washington, they could positively say that the next bag in the box matches up perfectly with the bag that we found at the scene. These Ziploc bags also had that pattern, that glove pattern on it. That is a direct transfer from the bloody gloves to the bags.
Searching the house, investigators collect receipts. Dr. Graniter's mobile phone and his computer drives. Next, police move outside and are shocked by what they discover in the doctor's garage.
We also found a box in his garage, kind of hidden behind. In the box, there was all sorts of sexual toys, as well as Viagra, for Dirk Graniter, and they were prescribed by Dr. Dirk Graniter. On day one at the scene, I asked if he had sexual relationships with his wife, and he had told me at that point that he didn't. So that gets me wondering, what are we missing here?
While searching the dog's kennel, they find what could be an important piece of evidence linking Graniter to the gloves found in the storm drains.
They found an identical pair of work gloves that were found at the crime scene.
It's not a smoking gun. It just, all it's telling us is that of all the gloves, he bought these. So that was an important find.
Now police have these identical gloves and other items found at Graniter's house. The evidence against him is growing. But Graniter is a respected doctor and member of the community, and police still need watertight evidence to put him behind bars. Detectives have already collected a wealth of evidence, including the doctor's blood-stained clothes and shoes, likely murder weapons and a glove hidden in a storm drain, as well as a second blood-stained glove in another drain in the area where May's body was found. But with no fingerprints or DNA on the knife or hammer, they cannot prove they were used by Dr. Graniter to kill his wife, May. If he was the murderer, has he committed the perfect crime? In a final bid to find the killer evidence that will prove who killed May, police put out a huge public appeal for information. The police are contacted by someone walking in the park at the time of the murder.
one of the people who were on the other side, probably a quarter of a mile away from May Grinder when she was being killed. Over the other side of a very tall hill, wind blowing right at him. And in retrospect, when we talked to him, did you hear anything? He said, yeah, I heard an ungodly-like scream. I thought it was kids.
Detective Foley is stunned. He has already heard about May's distinctive scream from her sister, and she used exactly the same words.
Her sister, Ilse, told us that one time they were mugged, and she let out an ungodly-like scream. It was exact same words that Ilse used, that he used with us as well.
Police believe they now have a full list of everyone in the nature reserve at the time of the murder. The man walking his dog is coming down the hill when Dr. Grinder comes out of the woods by the crime scene. Grinder runs off to one side, but returns soon after. A jogger is running through the woods nearby. Another man who heard the scream was walking just over the hill behind the crime scene. None of these people report seeing anyone else.
They could map out where everybody was at a certain time. And no one had seen any strange person, anybody running through the area that may have just committed a crime. That really undercut Dirk's claim that there was must have been some strange madman that killed May.
Police are now certain that Grinder is the culprit. Communication experts have come back with information about Grinder's mobile phone seized in the second house search. It leads to a line of investigation they never expected.
They subpoenaed Dr. Grinder's cell phone records, and they found some telephone calls that they later matched up to a phone number for an escort service that advertised in a weekly newspaper in Boston. Yeah, he had made calls to the Dedham Hilton, which is near Wellesley, where he had met another prostitute.
Dirk would use these ladies, so that explains the Viagra. We also had some credit card receipts of hotels where he'd be checking in at 12 o'clock in the afternoon and checking back out at 1:15. So all those things were making sense to us. It's like another life that he was leading.
Detectives discovered that Dirk Grinder has not only been leading a double life, he's also adopted an alias.
When Dirk made appointments for hotel trysts or to buy things for some of these prostitutes, he always purchased it under the name of Thomas Young. And Dr. Grinder took out an American Express corporate card in which he listed himself and he listed Thomas Young. Tom Young was Dirk's college roommate at Yale, and Dirk had not spoken to him for probably 25, 30 years.
Tom was a lawyer in Baltimore at the time, and so I called him up that night, and I said, well, Tom, the reason we're calling you is, are you in business, or do you have any business relationships with Dirk Grinder? He said, Dirk Grinder? I went to school with him. We lived in the same dorm at Yale. What's he using my name for? I says, well, he would use his name when he was using prostitutes. And Tom was upset. He didn't want his name being associated like that.
Further analysis of Dr. Grinder's computer reveals even more disturbing information about how he was becoming obsessed with sex.
Dr. Grinder's secret double life involved phone sex. He was going on websites that had live pornographic models. He had joined an adult dating site for like swingers or people that were interested in hooking up. He was talking to a couple about meeting to get together for a threesome. When he was on a business trip to New Jersey a week before the murder, he had had a prostitute come to his hotel in New Jersey for sex.
He would set up meets. I ended up calling the person who I thought was a woman, ended up being the woman's husband. So the husband said, yeah, I just spoke to him. In fact, he sent me a photograph of him, of himself, completely nude. This world-renowned doctor is sending nude photographs, frontal photographs of himself before he killed his wife. It looked to me like he was on a downward spiral.
But further computer analysis revealed that May Granider may have found out about her husband's double life.
There was some cross-activity on the computers that we found where it appeared that, I believe it was about a week prior to the homicide, that May had come across some of the matters that Dirk Granider was involved in with respect to soliciting sexual partners and couples.
The police now have a motive for May Granider's murder. Dirk Granider, his secret life, his obsession with sex workers, his great concern that his reputation as a good doctor and a good family man will be destroyed. So he hatched a murder plot to kill his wife. And this demonstrated his controlling and obsessive nature. In all likelihood, he was a psychopath.
This poor woman, just divorce. It would have been so much easier on them both.
A week before May's murder, all of this activity was ramping up. He was on the internet till early morning hours, not getting a lot of sleep. So there was this furious activity. He was on the phone with the prostitute that he called the day before the murder, the day after the murder. So it was just really this whole, like he was like out of control. He was doing everything in that week leading up to her murder.
Tracking the digital history of Granider's phone and computer is the final piece of evidence the police need to charge him. The prosecution can now argue in court that he has both opportunity and, most crucially, the motive to murder his wife. On Tuesday, the 29th of February 2000, 4 months after May's murder, Dr. Granider is arrested and charged.
I went up to his office, walked in, and he knew why I was there and placed him under arrest. Brought him back to Wallasey Police Station where he spent his night. He slept all night long, didn't stir. I could imagine what his previous 4 months were like. He slept like a baby that night.
Dr. Granider will be held in custody for 16 months until his trial.
It is an investigative priority to detain suspects, get them into custody as soon as possible. You want to prevent them from causing harm to anyone else. You want to prevent them from tampering with lines of inquiry, with evidence, or indeed engaging inappropriately with key witnesses.
The police finally have Granider in custody, and while the FBI continue to work on the forensic evidence, police resort to old-fashioned detective work. They start with the receipts discovered in the house to check that the gloves and hammer found belong to Granider.
There was one receipt recovered that was from Deal's Hardware, a local hardware store. They were the only store in Eastern Massachusetts that sold those particular type of gloves. The hammer itself was also pretty specific. It was a 2-pound drilling hammer. Home Depot and Lowe's, they sold a 1-pound drilling hammer and a 3-pound drilling hammer. Didn't sell a 2-pound drilling hammer. Deal's Hardware did. And there was only 5 of them sold that year at Deal's Hardware.
Police also have receipts from a shop often frequented by Dr. Granider that sell these same bags, and further tests prove the blood on these Ziploc bags is May's. The dot pattern from Dirk's gloves is all over them. There is no DNA from a third party. The police are leaving no stone unturned. They fear the defense lawyers will try and sow doubt in the jury's mind. They need the killer evidence. Just a month before Granider's trial, Foley decides to have the gloves re-examined.
The FBI had been really good with us. I pleaded with them to take a quick look at these gloves, and all that process takes months usually. Well, we had it done in days.
It was a breakthrough for the investigation. The gloves tested positive for both Dirk and May's DNA.
In finding both Dirk and May's DNA on the gloves, Dirk was wearing those gloves, and the gloves were present where May was.
The DNA match for Dirk Greinader was so good, only 1 in 170 million Caucasians could have the same profile. In a further confirmation that the gloves were worn by Greinader, the fingernail sample finally arrived.
So they came through, and in fact, they were able to testify that the fibers that were found in Dirk Greinader's nails came from the gloves found in those storm drains.
17 months after May Greinader's murder, police finally have the conclusive killer evidence they need to prove that Dirk Greinader killed his wife. At first, it was a mystery. Who would want to savagely attack and kill this 58-year-old mother of 3? But over the past 18 months, detectives have been building a wall of evidence against May's husband, Dr. Dirk Greinader. From his blood-stained clothes, the murder weapons, and bloodied glove, to his phone records and computer hard drive. The challenge for the prosecution will be to persuade the jury that a doctor who appeared to have it all would put everything at risk to murder his wife. But they can now argue in court that Greinader not only had the opportunity, but most crucially, a motive. Dr. Dirk Greinader's trial begins on Thursday, the 24th of May, 2001. As expected, the defense team uses the good character of the defendant as the basis for a not guilty plea. The man with the challenge of breaking that down and securing a guilty verdict is prosecutor Rick Grundy.
The totality of the evidence we had would have convicted 9 out of 10 people in a heartbeat on this case. The defense Dirk Greinader presented is that you don't want to believe that a person in my position in life would commit this crime. The defendant presented himself as the ultimate professional, family man, adored by his children. I knew the children would follow and back that up in testimony. And I remember the first question I asked him was to tell the jurors upon the death of May who the first person he called was, knowing that the first person he called was a prostitute that he was to meet the next day. He answered the woman's name, and I asked him, "That's prostitute, right? And that's the first person you called before you called her sister?" My wife has been brutally murdered, and I'm even thinking about what I gotta do, whether it's a dentist, a prostitute, or what else. To me, it said, I've had this all planned out, and I'm just gonna have to juggle things a little bit here. I said, "Judge, I think this is a good time to take the lunch break."
When court resumes, the prosecutor reveals more sordid details of Dr. Greinader's hidden life.
We presented some individuals who had run pornographic internet sites, 2 prostitutes who were involved with the defendant, and a couple who had been contacted for a group sex with the defendant and actually met with him. And the point was certainly to show a motive to the extent that this was different than the person that you presented to the world, as well as to investigators. And the fact that he would go to the effort of getting a falsified credit card and use that in pursuit of these things showed the extent that he would go to on one level to hide those things. So I think it was an important insight to who Dirk Greinader was at that time.
The things that really resonated with the jurors was just his untruthfulness, his lack of empathy for even his own wife. He was a horrible witness on the witness stand. You know, he cried at one point, but there really weren't tears there. He couldn't bring himself to turn and answer questions to the jury. Like at one point, his lawyer was like giving him like the head nod, like, look at the jury, look at the jury. He just couldn't do it.
Having raised doubts in the jurors' minds about the secret life and true character of Dr. Greinader, Rick Grundy must now turn the jury's attention to the killer evidence.
So I always look for that thing that kind of is a light bulb moment for the jurors. Like, I get it, I understand it, or I figured it out on my own. And that circles us back to the hands, the bloodless hands, again and again. We follow that up with the clips of his fingernails showing no sign of any kind of contact with May's blood, which is just totally opposite of what he told us himself, that he was in fact tending to her wounds. One of the very first questions they asked Dirk Greinader when they saw his wife and they saw him was, did you have gloves on? And they looked at his hands and they saw there was nothing visual with respect to him caring for his wife or being near blood. And they asked that repeatedly, and he repeatedly said, no, I was not wearing gloves. But in my opinion, he dug himself a hole there because the condition of his hands had to have meant that he had gloves on.
Dr. Greinader gave sober testimony, emphasizing his love for his wife and his embarrassment at his sexual escapades. But the evidence against him was overwhelming.
So as far as the importance of the various pieces of evidence, and what I ended up telling the jurors is that, you know, if you have a pile of bricks, it's a pile of bricks. If you start to assemble those bricks, you build a wall. If you build it right, you have a very strong wall. And if you take each piece of the evidence in this case and put them together and how they match up and how they speak to one another, it becomes an extremely powerful wall.
On Monday, the 25th of June, 2001, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
I never count my chickens before they're hatched when you have a jury. You know, it was a jury who was extremely attentive, and I certainly thought that was to our benefit. But, you know, a good jury is pretty much poker-faced. They don't display a lot. They're paying close attention. I felt that our case went in very well, but that doesn't necessarily equate to what the jury's going to do.
It was stressful. The jury was good. The jury foreman, and I'm staring right at him, and I'm thinking, I need to read this guy. You know, we did everything we possibly could, but you just never know. You just never know with a jury.
The judge was emphatic about the excellence of the police work and the strength of the prosecutor's case, and specifically he mentioned the DNA evidence linking Greinader to the knife and gloves involved in the murder, the blood spatter, fibre evidence, and a myriad of other circumstantial evidence, and crucially, the absence of blood on the defendant's hands.
The jury deliberated for 3.5 days. So the fact that they deliberated so long, a lot of people were stressed out over it, but they were very thorough. And they came back at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday afternoon, like they always do. And they were unanimous, ultimately, that Dirk Greinader had killed his wife.
The jury found him guilty. Murder in the first degree. First degree means that it was either pre-planned or with extreme atrocity or cruelty. In Massachusetts, a first degree conviction is a mandatory life without parole. Anybody with that should be held for the rest of their natural life.
It was awful. The guilty verdict, I don't think it helped anybody. It was sad. It was a sad day for everybody. So selfish of one person to take a life like that, and messing up his children's lives forever.
You know, Dirk Greinader was one of these people that I think his reputation meant everything to him. And in his, I guess, twisted mind, Instead of getting a divorce like most normal people would do, he decided that his only option for whatever life he wanted post-May was to kill her.
I think he thought he was a lot smarter than us in the beginning. I think his thought process was he had the perfect murder planned out. In his mind, he didn't. His plan went awry.
Although Dr. Greinader thought he had planned the perfect crime, the forensic evidence he unknowingly left behind finally caught up with him to prove it wasn't so perfect after all.